Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning.
Everybody had a good night's sleep? Ready to go this morning? It's going to be my responsibility to kind of steer us through things this morning, and we're going to begin with something special, and that is Bobby Mitchell and I are going to have a conversation. That'll be fun. We're just going to pretend they're not there, and you and I'll have a conversation. In the late 70s, early 80s, in Atlanta, Georgia. How many in the room have never been to Atlanta, Georgia? Raise your hand. Look at this, Bobby. These people didn't come to your hometown. Shame on them. This is your first visit to Albuquerque, right? Can you spell Albuquerque? Okay. We won't test you. Anyhow, in the late 70s, early 80s, a group of guys who owned businesses in the city of Atlanta got together to talk about something that's very commonplace to all of us. But at the time, probably not too many people thought about it. Think about this. How could I take this company that I have and use it for God's glory? Now, like I said, hopefully most of you in the room working in companies, that's your primary goal. But in the late 70s, 80s, not too many people thought about that. That group of guys was spearheaded. The person who was lighting a fire under these guys to talk about this was the gentleman sitting to my right, Bobby Mitchell. Bobby's a graduate of Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Clemson University in Clemson, South Carolina, and was a business owner, a company called Applied Ceramics. He also was a lecturer at Georgia Tech, speaking on, sounds like something Bill Mooney would talk about, ceramic engineering. Well, Bobby told me he worked at a company called Applied Ceramics. I thought he was talking about bathroom tiles and things like that. From that conversation was launched something that you know an awful lot about today called the Fellowship of Companies for Christ. And when it started up in the 80s, Bobby, the guy who spearheaded all of this, was the chairman of the board, and he has been the chairman of the board of FCCI ever since. And you folks are really privileged that he and his wife Sue have made their way to New Mexico to be a part of this particular conference. So do me a favor again, after this formal introduction, and welcome Bobby to the podcast. Bobby, I want you to know that I'm not responsible for any of these questions. So there was a committee of mean people that put together these questions. I think they're going to put them on the screen. I'm not sure about that. I can't see the screen. But Bobby, I think it'd be, first of all, I was going to talk about your family and how many years you and Sue have been married, etc. But it's better to have that come from you. You're a family man. Tell these folks about how long you and Sue have been married and your family.
Sue and I have been married 47 years. And we have 3 boys.
It's been a great journey.
Yes.
Sue, do you believe that? Yeah, she agrees with you.
That's good.
Takes 2 to tango.
But anyway, we've got 3 sons. They're all involved in our business. Bobby is 45, Lee is 42, and Chris is 35. So they spread out. We've got 8 grandchildren. They all live in Atlanta, and we see them a lot. We take care of the grandkids, and soon I have projects that we do with the various grandkids, and we're getting ready to take one of them, the oldest girl, to New York for a few days, and we're going to have brunch at the American Doll Factory. So that will be an experience.
Make sure you bring your checkbook.
I'm a father of 3. We've done this before, and we're in the process of taking our grandkids, one at a time, on a trip to somewhere they picked out and wanted to go.
That's perfect.
And so we've done one. We did Cooperstown for him to see the Braves inducted into the Hall of Fame, and then we slid over to New York and saw a few things there too. So we're in process there, but a great family.
Doesn't Bobby sound like a guy from Atlanta, Georgia? He and I were on a TV program yesterday, and when I talked, the people frowned like, he's talking so fast, what's he talking about? When Bobby talked, they said, he's talking so slow, what's he talking about? Nothing got through to anybody. Hey, Bobby, I told just a brief story that FCCI was kind of your idea, and you encouraged these other guys to think about the whole idea of taking and using our companies. Where did that come from in your own heart?
Well, it was, I was raised in a godly family. We went to church. I had all the church awards for attendance, never missed a Sunday, but I really wasn't walking with the Lord. I was baptized. I prayed to receive Christ at 10 or 12 years old, but I would rather go in the yard and play football or something else. And so when I got through college, soon I got married, and we went to what we thought was a cocktail party. It was in fact, it had no booze, and it was set up, and about 100 people were invited, and they had a guy named Cobby Ware come and present the gospel and the 4 spiritual laws. And he did that over the next 4 weeks. And then in the 5th week, Bill Bright came into town and taught us how to share our faith. And so it was a very significant time. I remember exactly where I was. I know the house. I know the people that invited us. And it changed my life. And soon I started wrestling with, what's that all about? What does that mean? And so I started looking at what I said I believed and compared it to my actions, and I found out I didn't have integrity. I was not living the life I was saying I wanted to live, and so that set me on a journey. Where's Joe? Joe, you set me up real good, buddy. We're talking about integrity.
Yes, sir.
And we're going to talk about it 2 or 3 times today. But at any rate, so I set off on a path. I didn't know how to get there. And then my mother gave me a book. It was a book called In His Steps. Some of you probably have read that book. And In His Steps is the story of an itinerant minister who walks into a big social church and challenges the congregation to answer every question in life by saying, what would Jesus do and do it? And so that little phrase, what would Jesus do, became central in my life. It isn't a Bible verse, but it almost has that quality for me. And so I started reading. In the book, there's a guy named Milton Wright, and he has a series of stores, and he tried to operate those stores to honor the Lord. This book was written in 1898, by the way, so it's not really a new idea. But I was fascinated with Milton Wright. About the same time, Larry Burkett and I became very good friends. And Larry and I met virtually every week, and we would study things. And I was on this bent of trying to have integrity, and I couldn't find anybody that had integrity. I was looking around, and it isn't as common as you'd think it would be. And then I realized my dad had integrity. That my dad was the same morning, noon, and night. I never heard him tell a lie. I never saw him walk off the path. He was a great godly man. And so my dad, this book, and Larry Burkett sort of came together in what I call a call of God. I believe we're all called of God. And that the sad part is we may not know, we may not hear that call, and we may not answer it. But God's calling, so we need to be listening. And so Larry and I met for a long time, and then we decided we would see if there was anybody else who had this thought of operating a company for Christ. In those days, we called it Christian company, but we modified the title. But what happened was we invited 70 men. We got 12 of them to come to this little exposition of telling what we're going to do. And then 9 of them agreed to meet every other week for 2 years to study the Word and find out what God had to say about running a business.
Were these friends of yours?
One of them was probably my best friend, but he had been on the all opponents team against Christians, and he got saved through my pursuit of this idea. And that was Bill Leonard. Some of y'all know Bill Leonard. And Bert Stumberg was a guy that I ultimately ended up being in business with. But basically, I didn't know the others. And so I called them, and other than Larry.
You just knew they were business owners, and you knew they were believers.
we knew they were business owners and we knew they were believers. And Larry and I, most of the list came from Larry. And
you folks know who Larry Burkett is?
And but at any rate, we started down this path. We started meeting, and it was a really interesting set of meetings. We would get in and we would argue, we'd scream, we would say that's not right. We would beat it to death, if you would. And but we had one principle that we established in the early days, and it has been there through today, and that is that we're going to seek God's answer, and we're going to come away united under Christ. And so it's a principle of unity.
Bobby, were there any models that when you got together you said, hey, we ought to do it like so-and-so? Did you observe anybody else who was doing what you men were starting to talk about?
Well, we did not, which is sort of a shocking thing. Bert and I went all over the country looking for people who would operate a company to glorify God. And we found many godly men running companies. We found no godly men committing their company to honor God through the marketplace.
Well, let's say that again. That's interesting. Say that again.
We found many godly men in positions of owning companies and doing great things, but we found no godly men who committed their company to God.
There's a difference there, isn't there?
There's a big difference. And Larry had a great influence. Larry was not, I wanted Larry to do this thing. And Larry said, I'm not doing it. God gave you the vision. I will stand by you and help you, but I'm not going to do it. He said, I'm called to teach finance. And so that was sort of frightening, but because I didn't know how to do what we were trying to do.
And all this time you're running your own, trying to make your own business survive.
I was 30 years old. So it was, I thought I knew a lot.
What about Stanley Tam?
Well, Stanley came in.
You know the name Stanley Tam? Because he was an influence, wasn't he?
Tremendous.
What did he do?
Stanley had a business, and in his business, they took they recovered silver from the photographic process, and he had a plastics business. And those became his.
In Ohio or somewhere?
He was in Lima, Ohio. And I flew up and talked to Stanley Tam. And on May 7th, 1980, you think that had an impact on my life? I came up to the building, and it's a 400,000 square foot building. It's on the highway, and there's a big sign on the side of the building that says, Christ is the answer. I went in, I sat down with him, and I said, tell me about that sign. He said, well, that's part of just trying to reach out. God burdened me to reach at least 5 people a day with the gospel. Can you imagine 5 people a day? I said, how you doing on that? It was May 7th. He said, well, he pulled out a little book out of his pocket. He said, in April, I had a good month. He said, we led 228 people to Christ in April 1980. And I was speechless. I could. For me, Bill Bright had taught us how to share our faith a few years before. We had been privileged to lead a few people to Christ, but not 5 people a day. Certainly not 228 people in a month. He said, my goal is to lead 1 million people to Christ in my lifetime. I said, what else are you doing? He said, I've built over 100 churches internationally. He said, I have given my company to the Lord. He said, we use the profits of the company to build the kingdom of God. It's not quite like running a company for Christ, but it's getting close.